Hello and welcome back to the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. I'm Joseph Arthur, Multimedia Editor at PMW, and now your new host for the Performance Marketing Unlocked podcast. A very big thank you to my predecessor, Lucy Shelley, who's now gone on to campaign as their tech editor and presented a very exciting opportunity for myself to come on and try and make what's already a really, really great podcast even bigger and better. So I'm very excited for that opportunity. And we plan on hitting the ground running. We've got a lot coming up on the horizon for our listeners to be excited about. We've got some big guests coming from big brands, ad tech, agency side, all across the performance marketing industry. We'll have you covered with expert and insight analysis, exciting interviews. But in the meantime, on this week's episode, we've got a very special editorial-only discussion. So be excited for that. We've got plenty of news chat coming your way. So settle in and enjoy the episode. Welcome back to the podcast studio. We have the entire PMW editorial team back again. It's exciting to be here. Reem Makari joining me, our news reporter. How are you, Reem?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm excited. It's the first time that we're without our former host, Lucy Shelley, now with Campaign. And I'm Joseph Arthur, your multimedia editor, new host of the podcast. Joining myself and Reem, we have our editor, Robin Langford. Robin, how are you?
Thank you, Joe. Good to be here.
And Jyoti Rambai, our premium content editor. How are you, Jyoti?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Shaking off the nerves, thankfully. Trying to give myself not too much editing to do by flubbing things up. So hopefully we can keep it nice and breezy. But we are here to chat to our listeners today about all things performance marketing news. I felt that it was appropriate in the wake of PMW Unlocked, our big event that just took place in March, to maybe revisit where we're at outside of Unlocked, because our heads have basically been on that for the last 4 or 5 months, intensely preparing. It feels like we've hardly had a moment to breathe, but a lot's been going on in the performance marketing landscape. So we're going to dive in with some headline news. And to start, I think it's only appropriate we go straight to our editor, the head honcho, Robin Langford. What's something that's come across your desk recently that you think our listeners should be aware of?
Thank you, Joe. I like being introduced as a head honcho. I don't see myself as that, but I kind of see myself more as an air traffic controller, if ever I describe my job. But thanks for the intro, Joe. Yeah, well, obviously he said Joe was talking about Unlocked, and one of the big subjects that came up there and has also been in the news this month has been marketing mix modeling, or MMM. And it's something that a lot of performance marketers are thinking about more, particularly in light of cookie deprecation. They're looking at new ways to measure their marketing. I really wish MMM had a better acronym, though, because it's such an awkward one to say on a podcast. I want to say but that won't really translate well in the podcast. And
Triple M.
Triple M. Wow, that's a good one. Triple M. Should we start a new trend for calling it Triple M?
It jumps out to me. It's actually an Australian radio station that's quite popular as Triple M.
Let's avoid any copyright issues in that case.
I think Triple M might work. I doubt we'll get in trouble. I mean, yeah, because or MMM isn't super seamless.
No, it doesn't trip off the tongue, but it is an incredibly useful marketing technique. But it's not new. It's actually something that marketers have been using since the 1950s. The big changes have been there have been more digital touch points that people have used for it. And now with cookie deprecation, and people were using things like attribution modeling a lot more to measure the impact of their marketing and where to allocate spend and where to allocate success. Marketing mix modeling is being used to replace some of that. It's a slightly complex subject, and I think it's one that's often it has a lot of mathematical and statistical things behind it, and quite frankly, I don't want to get too far into Bayesian models here. I can see everyone looking at me very strangely when I talk about things like that. But the principle behind all of that is actually a much more fundamental thing in marketing, which is giving credit where credit's due. And that's a constant battle within marketing. Well, it's a creative branding thing, saying, oh, actually, you might have driven sales here, but actually it was because of an advert we ran or something. And how do you actually measure why people are making the sales or conversions or leads that they're actually doing? Is it really the last thing they see, which is seen in last click attribution, and one of the things that's used quite heavily in still in affiliate marketing and in things like mobile marketing.
It's really important, isn't it, MMM? And it's because it fixes a little bit that attribution problem, but it just sounds intimidating because it's quite technical. As we've said, the acronym doesn't quite roll off the tongue. So people can get lost in it, but it's really important for, as you say, Robin, getting the attribution right. And at a time when marketers are a little bit at odds with the rest of the C-suite in terms of getting enough budget allocated for campaigns, it's really important that you can measure outcomes tangibly. And I suppose marketing mix modeling is a way to help that. But what's prompted it to pop up in the news recently, Robin?
Well, the reason it's come up a bit more in the news recently is because of Google launching Meridian, which is its open source marketing mix modeling solution. And it's come at a slight surprise because it's at odds with Google's privacy sandbox, which is their solution to going cookieless, because it allows marketers to actually play around with the code here and set their own North Star metrics. So it's definitely... A lot of marketers are a bit skeptical about how open source Google's Meridian is, but it's certainly a welcome addition. It also puts Google in competition with Facebook, who launched their own version called Robin, no association with me. And that was launched in 2021, but this is Google's attempt at it. And there's obviously lots of other MMM models out there. But we spoke to Niall Altrin, who's Director of Marketing Analytics at PYMC Labs, who knows a lot more about this kind of stuff than I do. And he really pointed out that the key differentiator with Google's Meridian is that it includes reach and frequency data from YouTube, and that's often not been used in MM modeling before. And so he said it's quite an exciting concept, and it allows planners to use their marketing strategies not just to decide where they should invest, but also how they should expose their target audience to multiple exposures.
It just sounds like one of those ones where it's Google putting their fingers in all of the possible pies, as Jyoti said off air, because it does seem in counter a little bit to its walled garden, the privacy sandbox, to then come out here and invest in Meridian and supposedly open source model. I know some of the sort of early skepticism is coming as to how open source it is. At the moment, you need to sort of apply to trial the tool Meridian. Google has said it will become available more broadly very, very soon. But it's certainly an interesting pivot. And it's a time where Meta's sort of come back into the fray a little bit in terms of their earnings were really, really good at the back end of 2023. Google did see some share decline in that same time. So maybe they're just trying to invest in as many different things as they can to make it so that no matter what you're looking for as an advertiser, as a marketer, there is a Google option that you can turn to.
Absolutely, Joe. And a quick point about some of the disadvantages of using marketing mix models is it is more of a long-term thing. Often they recommend you have 2 to 3 years worth of data to truly see how all your different marketing is interacting. And it does also require a level of incrementality testing, and that requires bravery, because to truly test incrementality, you have to take something away. You have to say, what happens if I stop advertising all my Facebook advertising, or all my Google search ads, or something like that. So you need to then you can see the actual effect. It's a bit like yourself saying, what would happen if I didn't show up to work today? What would actually happen? And am I having an incremental effect? And that does require a certain level of bravery, and you do need to say that it's worth cutting off this certain source or this certain advertising source for a short period of time to measure its incremental effect. So it's a bit of a deeper project than you would get from your attribution models or from your GA4 analytics. But it's up to each company to decide whether they're going to do that. And actually, Google say that something like 60% of companies in the US have some sort of MM modeling going on at the moment. I think it's within the top Fortune.
And I believe
500.
of those who aren't yet investing, over 50% are considering doing so. So it's certainly something that organizations are looking at.
Sure, absolutely. It's just, if you're not thinking about it, it's certainly worth considering. And Google Meridian is another way for you to try it, but other MMM models are available.
Yeah, we certainly, there's plenty of options out there on the MMM front. But thanks, Robin. It is an interesting one that's come across the news desk, and anything that sort of heats up the Google Meta competition gets people excited. So there's a lot happening on that front. Jyoti, let's turn to you. What about you? What's caught your eye on in the news recently?
Yeah, I want to talk about the news that brands can now sponsor programs on Netflix. So earlier this month, Netflix launched The Gentleman, which is an 8-part series about a criminal underworld. And actually, that's one of the streaming platform's biggest launches in the UK so far this year. And now the series is sponsored by Schweppes, and it is the first brand to land a UK title ad buy. So the partnership is the latest from Netflix as it expands its advertising offering across connected TV, or CTV as we're calling it now. So I guess for some time now we've seen linear TV has been declining, and that's not going to change. More and more people are watching TV series and movies via, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, and also when you look at your traditional TV broadcasters, they've also got their own platforms. So people are just watching things on, say, ITVX or BBC iPlayer, as and when is convenient for them. So I guess for Netflix, they've actually been able to recognise an opportunity here and tap into this market quite a while back. So it launched its advertising tier back in November 2022.
Not the first streaming platform to do so either, but yeah.
The biggest
certainly
one, yeah. And it was quite a big deal at the time because a lot of brands thought, okay, this is great, but then a lot of brands were then hesitant about advertising on the platform. One was down to the cost of placing an ad there, and the other was, nobody knew at that time exactly what the reach was going to be, how many people would then actually sign up to the advertising tier. But now that it's been 18 months since its launch, roughly, yeah. So Bob estimated that by Q4 2023 it had a reach of around 1.45 million in the UK, which is equivalent to about 5.1% of homes.
And I imagine when you compare it to other streaming services with ad tiers, it's a reasonably, and I'm just postulating here, but I think it's a reasonably big chunk compared to perhaps some of the competitors out there.
Yeah, and you've also got to bear in mind that in terms of some of the competitors out there, they've all launched a lot later. So, Amazon Prime ads just launched earlier this year.
Really recently.
Disney Plus was launched initially, their advertising tier in the US, and then I think it brought it to the UK.
It's either been brought to the UK or coming to the UK.
Yeah, something
soon.
like that.
I think it has been, because they did overcharge me at one point.
Oh, did they?
It's because I kept the ad-free version, so I think they have.
So, yeah. But again, it's all new, yet now Netflix is expanding its ad offering, which I think is an interesting...
Do you think, with Schweppes being the first brand to come on and purchase an ad buy, do you think the scope for that on Netflix, if you are an organisation or a brand, do you think you need to be quite a big consumer-facing brand to invest in something like that? What about where are the opportunities for something that doesn't have the notoriety of, say, a Schweppes? Do they need to look elsewhere?
I don't know, and, this is just the first one, so I think we need to... It's kind of a space to watch. Mm-hmm. We're not going to know exactly what it's going to be like. Schweppes is obviously part of the Coca-Cola company, so it's got that massive consumer reach at a global level. And I think, the bigger brands are probably going to want to look at this and want to have a spot or be somewhere in this region because that's where their audiences are. And on top of that, we're in a place where we can start targeting people based on what they're viewing. So if they want to target a particular audience, there is the data there.
The streaming wars are really interesting, and it's one that it's certainly a space to watch in performance marketing. But I think, as you mentioned, there's still some people watching linear TV, less so. You've got CTV now coming into the fray. I just think where consumers are is becoming more and more fragmented. Just, not just within streaming services themselves, but just when and where they're watching it. Think about the different mediums you watch on, whether that's a mobile, TV, an iPad, a PC, elsewhere. Exactly. It just must be so hard for brands to know what to invest in, where they can kind of guarantee.
Well, this is why I think
People
this
are gonna
is
see it.
interesting, right? They're not just doing a general advertising placement on a streaming platform. They've chosen to sponsor a show which is likely to appeal to a certain demographic, a certain group of people. So it's a little bit more, it's much more targeted. So it's almost a step more towards getting your return on investment, hopefully, I would like to say. I mean, obviously there's no guarantees, but
You can see the clear plan in place. Of,
Exactly.
Okay, this is a good way to reach an audience of this specific show. The Gentleman's an interesting one as well because the series is based off of, loosely, I think it's set similarly to the movie that came out recently as well. It
Yeah.
follows a very similar, and that movie, The Gentleman, Guy Ritchie, I believe,
Yeah,
directed
that's the
it,
one.
did very, very well. And so the series, I imagine Schweppes, when looking at this investment, they understood that it's already a popular idea, it's a popular storyline. They might have got some data on the audience for that film, and they can sort of translate that into thinking, okay, we've got Netflix, one of the big streamers, we know they've got a big audience, let's give this ad buy a go, because if we purchase a show like The Gentleman, for example, we know roughly that some people are going to watch it, and we get an idea of that demographic.
I will say as well, like my personal opinion about why I think it's a good idea for brands to be advertising on streaming platforms is a big consideration that people who use streaming services like Netflix, like Amazon, and like Disney Plus, they're very, very likely to be binge watching a lot of the shows. And if you have ads playing in between each episode, those ads are going to get stuck in people's head. Like that's happened to me watching, I think my friend made me watch the In-Betweeners, and I got like a Just Eat ad stuck in my head for several days after, because we would just binge watched the whole show. So I think that's a way where you can get the attention of the users, of the audience, is because they're binge watching all of this content.
Yeah, so actually that's really interesting you say that, because I have spoken to Netflix and I know that they are looking into those sort of things. So looking at viewing habits, when the people binge watch, when is the appropriate time to put an ad in. And then just going off the back of what you guys were saying about The Gentleman, you got to remember as well, it's just an 8-part series, so it's 8 episodes. So it's a good way for a brand to trial something. 8 episodes isn't too long, but it's a good way to see how it works, I guess.
It's a smart sort of risk versus reward, I think, from
Yeah.
Schweppes, as far as you can surmise. And it's interesting because there's a lot happening in the streaming space from a performance marketing perspective, with ad tiers, ad-free tiers across different geographies. Things have got to be different because of different regulations. But Netflix really do seem to be at the forefront of everything. And they are perhaps the streaming service that's got the most notoriety, particularly out in the Western markets. They've also experimented a lot with live events as well. The Netflix Cup, they recently had a show that was Rafa Nadal against Carlos Alcaraz. They just sort of played a tennis match. I can't remember what it's called, but it was broadcast live and you can watch it post the event as well on the service. So they're definitely doing a lot, and it's really interesting. As you said up top, Josie, I think it's something to watch and it's a space to be aware of. So I think it's one that, the ad buying, maybe it is something that becomes a little bit more feasible for brands with less notoriety. And, you've got these big ones like Schweppes that, we can just see, okay, how does it go? It's one that everyone will be interested in watching.
And there is absolutely loads of inventory on these streaming channels. We're actually, what's the phrase, we're in peak TV now, where there's so many TV shows coming out. And I do think that we don't always see, that I don't always see ads on things like Channel 4 where I'd expect to see ads. I'm thinking, actually, why is no one taking advantage of this? And you're saying, why aren't smaller brands getting involved? I think there is a huge space for that, especially in the programmatic CTV world. The big sort of criticism I've heard in the last year has been that people have been wary about the level of transparency they're getting on their programmatic ad buys. They don't know where their ads are going to appear on CTV. And it's not just these big streamers. There's lots of very small free view type things. As I've got a new TV and I just realised how many ad-funded TV channels there really are underneath the top ones. You see, they're kind of crazy gardening things and all stuff going on. And so there's a lot of space to be bought. I think transparency is an issue, pricing's an issue, and brand safety as well, I suppose.
Reem, I'm going to go to you now to talk about the news, because I know you've got some news that's come across your desk recently that's a little bit more consumer-centric. So take it away. What have you got for us?
Yes, so obviously I'm still very new. So part of me trying to adjust to the performance marketing world is by going to events and trying to learn the different highlights and different key takeaways that are on everyone's mind at the moment. So I recently went to a Dentsu event, and during the opening remarks, the UK and Ireland CEO Angela Tanges was talking basically about the next generation of consumers and who brands need to be targeting, and she showed some of the research that the company has been doing, and part of that was talking about how Gen Z, for example, have less disposable income, or are going to have less disposable income in the future because of things like the fact that the UK is in a recession, the fact that there's inflation, cost of living, no one can afford anything. It's awful being Gen Z. It's awful just existing.
Speaking from experience.
Yes, there's one maker. So they're not going to be spending on whatever in the future. They're going to be a bit more conscious about that, but also some of the research showed that 5% of Gen Z are willing to spend 5% of their salary on a good cause. So if a brand has a key message like sustainability, for example, or raising money for different charities, or helping a certain group of people, then that would be something that would be important to Gen Z consumers, and they might be more willing to invest money into that brand than they would for a brand that doesn't care about these values. So that's something that brands need to really consider. And then it's also not just about targeting the next generation of consumers, it's also looking at the older generations that exist currently and that actually do have disposable income, because their savings are increasing. A lot of them are reaching retirement age as well. And one way that they showed that at the Dentsu event is there was a session that was with Hilton that was talking about the Curio collection by Hilton, and they basically did this campaign called A Unique Take, which featured like 3 different influencers in 3 different hotels, and they got to create an entire project on their own to represent that hotel that matches their personality. And although those influencers are likely, I would say they were probably Gen Z, millennial, and they were known from TikTok and whatnot, the target audience isn't Gen Z. The target audience of people who are actually going to be spending money on these hotels are people who have that, who are able to live that luxury lifestyle.
So would you say that's sort of like the early days Gen X, perhaps?
Gen X, and maybe the older millennials.
Yeah, older millennials.
I'm just happy if hotels give you like herbal tea or something. Oh, I live in the high life.
Yeah, do you know what? I was really disappointed when I went somewhere and the hotel didn't have tea and coffee in the room.
Oh, that's awful.
I was like, oh.
Although apparently you're not supposed to use the kettle at a hotel.
Oh, yeah, let's not go there.
Yeah.
I've noticed gone are the days of the pillow chocolate. That really upset me.
Oh.
I haven't seen pillow chocolate
that must be like 6-star now.
Yeah, I was going to say...
It's an interesting point you bring up, though, Reem. It's that idea of when you look at Generation Z and how to reach cash-strapped consumers, and that's not all Gen Z, but it's, I guess, the bulk of these younger consumers. And the data shows that you've got 70% of UK students, this is according to Unidays, have the cost of living crisis as a top concern in their lives. Over half of them feel financially overwhelmed. So it is a problem among that audience. But it's good to know for brands and advertisers that if you can strike a chord in a cause that your younger audience cares about, they are willing to sort of pay that premium, whether that be something along the lines of sustainability. And we looked at that in last year's sustainability report, which is still available on the PMW website. There is an inclination from consumers, particularly younger consumers, to have a bit more of an affinity for brands, and they can reflect that in their spending for those brands that do care about causes that align with Gen Z. Sustainability is a really, really big one. So it's an interesting point you raise, but it's equally interesting to look at the idea of these new mediums and influencer marketing and TikTok, Reels on Instagram, and using these different channels and mediums to reach older generations because perhaps they're becoming more and more familiar with them.
I mean, yeah, and you also have to consider the fact that a lot of those Gen Z TikTok users have parents, and I mean, I've done this myself. Or like, I'm a very big fan of TikTok. I'm on it almost too much, and I'll constantly send things to my parents where I'm like, I think this is something that would be great for you, and I just saw it in an ad on TikTok, and then they'd end up purchasing it. So it's a great way to reach the other generations that you can't reach, and it's also great to reach younger ones where it's like sometimes they have siblings, or sometimes some of the TikTok consumers are also millennials that now have children that are Gen Alpha, and you can also reach Gen Alpha. So it's just like it's you can't just look at it as reaching one demographic. It's just about focusing on one but trying to reach many.
It's this idea of, and we spoke about it at Unlocked, and it sort of leans into social and community commerce and just how they're becoming ever prevalent. And I suppose it's why investment in things like retail media is so high, because you're just talking about reaching consumers with as many touch points as possible. And a lot of that does come through these social TikTok channels that perhaps primarily are the way you'd reach younger generations. But as you said, Reem, there's a lot of parents that are like, what are our kids doing all day? I'm actually quite curious. Let's have a look at what's going on with Instagram and TikTok. And
that came up in the Unlocked panel that our own Reem was on, the Gen Z panel, and they were talking about how someone's mum wanted her to research a washing machine for her. She was like 20, she had no interest in a washing machine, but she did the research for her mum, and then she became the super micro influencer for her mum, and actually to decide on spending like £300-400 on a washing machine, which is a big high ticket purchase. And again, you've got to think about all these ways, these different ways that who you reach and how they connect to one another within the whole ecosystem, both online and offline.
I think there's one thing I need to add to this, Reem, and it's slightly more indicative of there are other ways to reach younger generations, and it can just be with a really, really good product. And it's because despite everything we've touched on, the cost of living crisis causing anxiety, feeling financially overwhelmed, the majority of Gen Z and younger consumers, this same research from uni days also pointed out that while, for example, 52% of students in the UK are really, really concerned about their buying decisions and their ability to save money for the future, for example, in spite of that, students rank the highest in 15 out of 17 product categories for intent to purchase fashion items, for example, which are a big luxury. So you do have those sort of fickle Gen Z consumers where I'm not sure all of the time their purchase intentions and their actual their purchasing are aligned. I think the intentions and the decisions, there's a little bit of a misalignment there that brands should be aware of, because it is something that can be taken advantage of.
I would say I'm guilty of that. But I also think that's where brands can go back to thinking about how do they make sure that their values then align with the consumer, because with Gen Z spending on fashion, I think a lot of the time some of their top considerations are things like sustainability. And you'll see a lot of Gen Z people specifically now buying a lot from like Vinted. And other secondhand shops. So if they could focus on that sustainability angle, I think they'll still be willing to have Gen Z people purchase and spend their money, but they'll just fool themselves into thinking it's for a good cause anyway. So I'm just gonna spend all my money.
Something really interesting worth talking about is AI, because a big thing that's been talked about in the last 12 months is the data skills gap. And a lot of people fear, and this was in an article on the website recently, that trying to bring AI into internal marketing, particularly performance marketing teams, is going to metastasize that data skills gap, because a lot of them aren't prepared to do so. Robin, I see you nodding your head.
No. It does sound. It sounds like it's something that's a bit industry wide, in that you're going to get left behind if you don't at least experiment with implementing AI into your data strategy. And I think the key thing is experiment and also elevate it to whoever's your decision makers within your team. Make sure that AI is properly fully implemented so you can actually start using it within your teams, because often the main barrier to using AI tools is like payment of a subscription, be able to try out what works and what doesn't, and see and often that's the first barrier. So make sure you just kind of talk to the right people.
It is interesting. I found the data here. You've got this was a survey from Bray's most recent customer engagement review, which was conducted in tandem with Wakefield Research, and it surveyed a series of senior marketers. Found that 92% are eager to embrace AI, which is reflective of the industry sentiment we see, where it's like, okay, we've got to use AI, got to put it into our internal teams somehow. And yet, of those same senior marketers, 52% have identified a lack of data skills among marketing talent. So it's another crossroads that just doesn't work. So it's going to be interesting to see how that functions.
I think so. This idea of a shortage of talent with the relevant skills, I think that's been something that's been on people's minds for a little while now. One, you have to also remember that AI and data skills is also it's a broad topic. So what you need specifically for either the brand or the agency you're working with and the company might be different. And there's an element of education here as well. Like, is our courses in that still a little bit behind? So the people that are coming into the industry as the recent graduates, not equipped with the basic level of skills. And then that begs the question that, should companies take that on? Should they train people up? Should they be the one to introduce the courses or training required?
I think you need to be careful of as well, if you're at a market, as part of a marketing team, you need someone who's an expert on these things. You do need someone who understands data skills, for example, so that they can teach people up. Because I think a lot of what you have, and it's where AI could cause some trouble, is you got people that are going to invest in AI and, as you said, Robin, experiment, and that's great. But if you don't have anyone who knows what they're doing at a base level, they're already struggling to incorporate data into their teams and understanding how to use it. And it's like, well, let's just get AI to collect a bunch of stuff for us. You're really going to struggle to synthesize it into any insight. So I think a level of expertise from someone within internal marketing teams is really, really important. And I'm not sure it's something that we're seeing industry-wide yet.
Even with AI like being incorporated into different marketing teams, different performance marketing teams, you are still going to need the human. You still are going to need the human in the beginning, and you're going to need the human in the end. And then AI is just kind of in the middle. But you can't ignore the fact that everyone's using it now. And if you're not going to be using AI, then your competitor is immediately at an advantage. So it's like you said, Robin, like you need to be experimenting and seeing what works for you. Not everything's going to work, but eventually you'll find something and you'll find sort of a balance. And then I think that will also teach everyone else on those teams and everyone who's going to be entering into the industry as a new person, that they need to be multi-skilled in different areas that AI can do as well. It's kind of the same where like with the way that we're journalists, and with journalists now it's very much expected to have multiple skills in terms of like you need to be able to write as well as edit, as well as do social media, as well as do podcasting. You have to be multi-skilled now as a journalist to make it in the industry. It's the same with performance marketing. You need to be multi-skilled in order to continue advancing.
Yeah, and I think it future-proofs yourself, because some skills are just going to become defunct and some are going to become more important. So the more multi-skilled you are, the more future-proofing yourself are. And with AI, it's just... I've seen like the video production stuff they're doing. A year ago, I was laughing at the AI videos, the terrifying burger and beer ads you were seeing, and then they're showing stuff now that could be used in like a Star Wars movie and stuff. And I think we're in this weird limbo stage where we're kind of still able to somewhat laugh at AI's efforts, even within data and stuff. We still have to double check if AI is scraping the data correctly and things, but in 2-5 years time, I think it's going to be replacing a lot of things, but it doesn't mean it's going to take jobs. It's just going to shift jobs, and within performance marketing, you're going to see that yourself. So what Reem said, absolutely get multi-skilled, because I think whatever you're good at, some of those things you will still need. The human will be the differentiator at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think just what you mentioned there, we've seen in the last 10 years jobs evolve. We're going to start seeing jobs in this sector coming up that didn't exist or don't exist right now. So it's definitely worth
Who knows where any of us will be a decade from now.
No,
Ironically, Ironically, it's AI is a sort of self-learns as it goes. And it, as you said, in the past 12 months, it's done a lot of learning and improved in a lot of ways. But we can't forget that when using AI, I think as humans, we need a little bit of self-learning as well, and just need to dive into the pool a little bit, give it a go, and change things and tinker and learn along the way. So we're sort of going hand in hand with AI, both trying to learn more about one another, and hopefully we can come together with some sort of symbiosis that works. We'll have to wait and see. Thanks very much for joining me, everybody, on this first PMW Unlocked episode that I'm hosting myself. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks to Reem, Robin, and Jyoti for joining us today. Thanks very much for listening to this episode. As I said up top, we've got a lot of exciting things on the horizon. We've got some big interviews coming, some really insightful discussions. First coming out a fortnight from now. I won't give away any spoilers, but we've got a couple of really exciting guests coming on that show to talk about all things retail media. So look out for that in a fortnight's time. In the meantime, thanks very much for listening. And don't forget to like, comment, and of course, subscribe to our podcast wherever it is you get your podcast, whether that be Spotify, Apple Music, or elsewhere. Those subscriptions mean the world. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now.